The old teacher who looked down on the visitor and burst into tears when she realized it was the president, the silent man at the back of the classroom. That morning in Ouagadougou wasn't as picturesque as usual, nor as bright as the postcards promoting tourism. The sky was covered in a thin mist, the clouds heavy as if about to release an out-of-season, dry-season rain. The smell of dirt and roasted corn in the early morning mixed in the air thick and familiar, like the very breath of the city. On the eastern corner of the city, where nameless roads crossed each other like dry, cracked lines on an old piece of wood, stood a small school named Komboaga, 4, a place where time seemed to have stopped. The classroom walls were stained by the passage of time, each brick seemingly bloodied by the sun and winds of the Sahel. The window hinges were loose. The wooden desks swayed like the memories of children who had sat there, grown up, and left behind a time of ignorance. And a woman who had never left her classroom. Her name was Adiza Kabore. She had taught here for 29 years, a number long enough for her first students, now parents of the children in her class. And to these children she wasn't just a teacher, she was a symbol of discipline, of standards, and of a quiet authority that needed no shouting. Miss Adiza had rules. Order came first. Students had to behave. Adults had to be respectful. And above all, no one was allowed to enter her class without something proving they deserved to be there. That morning, the thin rain had just stopped. The children, muddy from the dirt, lined up to enter the class. Amidst the usual noise of a public school morning, a man silently walked through the school gate. No one paid attention to him. His shirt was wrinkled, his old shoes unpolished, holding a weathered leather notebook in his hand. On his shoulder, a small bag, the kind people used to carry papers, and 2 books, no more. He stopped for a moment in front of the school sign. He stared for a long time, as if recalling something. The security guard thought he was a local official coming for a visit, and didn't ask any questions, simply pointing toward the classrooms behind him. Class 4B, Miss Adiza is teaching right now. You can go in if you want to observe. The man nodded in thanks. A soft smile, a slow, quiet nod like a rest in a symphony. Class 4B was as usual. Blackboard, white chalk, worn wooden desks. The kids were focused or pretending to be. At the teacher's desk, Ms. Adiza was enthusiastically explaining fractions. Her voice rang clear with each beat like a steady drum on the earth. If a cake is divided into 8 pieces and you eat 3, how many pieces are left? A shy boy scratched his head hesitantly, replying, 5. Good. You understood, but what if you eat 5 pieces instead? Laughter rose. She smiled, a rare moment. Just then the wooden door creaked open. The man walked in. No one knew who he was. Ms. Adiza turned. Her eyes narrowed slightly behind her thick glasses. Her gaze was sharp as a needle. "Who are you looking for?" she asked, not hiding her annoyance. The man spoke softly. "I've been assigned to observe some real classroom lessons. I'd like to sit at the back and observe." "Do you have a letter of introduction?" "I didn't bring one. I'm here alone, no group." "Then I ask that you stay outside. This is a classroom, not a place for anyone to enter." The man nodded slightly. No argument, no confrontation. He simply turned toward the back of the room and sat in an empty chair, alone. The class fell silent. Ms. Adiza glanced at him again. She was used to this type of silence, the kind that stirs up a storm. She continued the lesson, but her eyes never left the strange man. A moment later, he spoke, softly. "Excuse me, teacher, but I notice your students seem quite good, but have you ever asked them what they think?" The class went silent. Miss Adiza looked up. She hesitated for a second before replying, "I don't ask for their thoughts. I teach math, not philosophy." He remained silent, nodding. A girl sitting at the front desk, Fatimata, turned to look at him. She smiled lightly. "You're like my dad." He asked questions like that. Miss Adiza snapped, "Fatimata. In class we study, not idle chatter. Children shouldn't judge adults. The atmosphere in the classroom was different then. The silence wasn't because of fear, but because everyone was asking themselves, who was this man? Why didn't he argue, and why? Did his gaze toward Fatimata seem so gentle? A little while later, the classroom door opened again. This time it was the principal. He hurried in, his forehead covered in sweat. Sorry for the interruption. Miss Adiza, Class 4B. I need to inform you. The person sitting in your class today is President Ibrahim Traoré. No one breathed. Miss Adiza froze. Fatimata's eyes widened, her hand gripping her pen. The man, the one who had been asked to leave mocked and looked down upon, now stood up. His gaze hadn't changed. It was still calm, still deep. Only now, this classroom had just stepped into a lesson that wasn't in any textbook. The lesson not found in the syllabus. Miss Adiza stood motionless. The classroom, once her world, a place where she could control everything from the sound of chalk to a mere glance, now felt like a stage stripped of its backdrop, and the only audience was the man she had just asked to leave half an hour ago, President Ibrahim Traoré. No uniform, no badge, no bodyguards, just a simple man sitting quietly listening to a lesson on fractions, and listening also to how adults often judge others simply by a wrinkled shirt. The class remained utterly silent. The children were too young to understand power, but they were sensitive enough to realize their teacher had made a mistake. And the scary part wasn't the mistake itself. It was making it in front of an entire generation learning how to grow up. Miss Adiza tried to swallow her throat dry. She intended to say something, but her voice was hoarse. The president took a step forward, not fast, not slow, as if each step was walking through the dust of history habits and prejudice, to meet the woman who had stood at the front of the classroom for 29 years. I don't blame you, he said, his voice deep but warm. She shook her head slightly, her lips trembling but silent. He continued, his gaze never leaving hers. You did what many others would do. When you see a strange man without papers walk into your class. He looked toward Fatimata, the young girl still staring at everything like a dream she hadn't yet woken from. But do you know, he spoke gently, that girl, she taught me something today. Not with an essay, not with a math problem, but with a very simple sentence. He looks like my dad. The class murmured softly. Fatimata lowered her face, clutching the hem of her shirt. I was once a child, like Fatimata. I once wanted to speak my mind, but was shut down by a very familiar phrase, children shouldn't interrupt adult matters. The president turned back to the teacher. His look was not one of triumph, but of someone who had once been underestimated, and understood that feeling deeply. I'm not here to test you. I'm here to understand. How many children in this country are sitting in classrooms and have never once been asked, what do you think? He turned to the students. Today you're not just learning math. You're learning how adults treat each other. And what you witnessed this morning will teach you about power, kindness, and humility. By now, Ms. Adiza had tears in her eyes. Not the kind of tears of guilt or regret, but the quiet tears of someone realizing the core of teaching isn't in imparting knowledge, but in sowing the seeds of character. She choked, I'm sorry. The president raised his hand gently. You don't need to apologize. I didn't come here for an apology. He took a small piece of paper from his pocket, the neat handwriting of a child clearly visible. I came because I received this letter. He held it up. Don't be sad anymore, teacher. I forgive you because everyone forgets how to be kind sometimes. The class fell silent. Miss Adiza cried, not because of shame, but because she had been forgiven by a child. The president folded the letter, walked over to the teacher's desk, and gently placed it on the table. No sound but the action resonated in the hearts of everyone in the room. I have an invitation for you. She looked up, her eyes red. I want to invite you to be the honorary advisor for the School of Kindness program, a small reform project but one that's enough to start with those who dare to change." He paused for a moment. "Not because you're perfect, but because you had the courage to realize that no one stands in front of a classroom for too long without needing to learn something again." Ms. Adiza bowed her head deeply. The first time in her teaching career, not to maintain discipline, not for her position, but to bow to someone who had once been deemed unworthy of sitting in class. That afternoon, as the bell rang for the end of class, she slowly walked down the hallway, watching each student leave books in hand, smiles on their faces. Fatimata ran up to her, offering a candy. "The president gave me this the other day. I saved it for you." Ms. Adiza choked up. She couldn't speak. The small candy, wrapped in crinkled paper, was a quiet thank you, the end of a prejudice and the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter of learning, where adults listen to children, exchange a shout for a true word. On Monday morning, Class 4B was bathed in sunlight. The light filtered through the old window, casting a pale yellow glow on the chalkboard. Dust particles floated in the early light like fragments of time quietly drifting by unnoticed by anyone. Miss Adiza entered the classroom earlier than usual. In her hands, she held a new box of colored pencils, a few stacks of blank paper, and a paper bag filled with ginger cookies. No one knew why, and she didn't explain. But from her eyes, people could see something inside this woman had changed. No one had forced her to change. No orders from the Ministry of Education, no reporters, no cameras. It was just... She felt that she could no longer teach the same way. The lesson began with something unusual. No roll call, no surprise test. Ms. Adiza took out the stack of white paper and distributed it to each student. "Today we're going to do something different." The children looked at each other, their eyes full of curiosity and surprise. A few raised their hands shyly, but she gently gestured. "No need to ask. I just want you to write one thing you want me to know, but have never dared to say." The class fell silent. Some bit their pencils, others pursed their lips, staring at their desks. Some silently shed tears, but no one knew why. She didn't rush them. She just stood there, gently, quietly, as for the first time in her life, she wasn't trying to control the class, but waiting for the class to open up. When the class finished writing, she gathered the papers and put them in her bag without reading them right away. She didn't want to turn those words into a report card. She wanted them to be treated like letters to someone willing to listen. That evening, she sat in her room. No fan, no radio, only the sound of paper rustling and the soft murmur of her heart learning how to understand her students. The first note. "Teacher, I want you to smile at us every morning. I think if you smile, I'll study better all day." The second note, "I once misspelled a word. You scolded me in front of the class. I wasn't angry, but I was sad. I wish you'd just told me quietly." The third note, "I want a day where I can tell a story. I think I tell it really well, but you've never called on me." She placed her hand on her chest. Her heart beat slowly, but heavily. She saw herself in 1986, the day she first stepped into teaching with the dream of lighting up minds. But all these years between lessons, grade books, and white chalk, she had probably forgotten light only comes when you know how to be gentle. Then she opened a special piece of paper, the neat handwriting, the paper folded in four. No name. "Teacher, I think you don't hate anyone, but you shout too much, so I'm scared. I don't hate you. I just want you to ask us, are you okay?" Ms. Adiza broke into tears, not the loud sobs of regret, but the quiet tears of someone who had just found something they had lost long ago. Tenderness. The next morning, the class was given cookies. She said, "I don't have any 10s for what you wrote yesterday, but I have one thing to thank you for, because you taught me how to be an adult without hurting children." The class clapped. For the first time, not because they were getting out early, not because of a reward, but because they saw their teacher changing, not to please anyone, but to heal. A week later, during a math lesson, Fatimata raised her hand. "Teacher, can I tell a story today?" Ms. Adiza looked at her, smiling. "If you promise to continue the lesson after you're done." Fatimata nodded eagerly. She stood up and began, "I once dreamed of talking to you outside the lessons, but I didn't dare, because I thought you'd scold me. But today I can tell it. I think you're different now." The whole class burst into laughter, and Miss Adiza bowed her head, placed her hand on the desk, where the president had once placed a small piece of paper, as if the children's heart in this classroom had just opened a door she had never walked through in 29 years of teaching.